During the lockdowns, Venice went from having a few homeless people hanging out on the boardwalk and around town to being completely overtaken with massive homeless encampments. You can see the extent of it in these clips that I took back in about October 2020. Recently, in response to community pressure and international embarrassment in the media, the city of Venice has been clearing away the homeless encampments on the boardwalk. They've made a big deal of finally doing something about it and have videos of garbage trucks, bulldozers, and crews cleaning away all the tents and the trash. But many have said that all it's doing is moving the problem elsewhere. I drove out to Venice, and I have to concur. The homeless didn't vanish. They didn't find homes. They just moved. And the programs there to provide housing for the homeless are nothing but expensive jokes. As you approach on Venice Boulevard from Culver City, there are a number of beat-up RVs lining the street along with some tents. RV camps are actually all over the streets of Los Angeles now, and they're just a slight step up from a tent. And this is going to be the subject of one of our next videos. On Main Street, directly in front of the Google offices in Venice, we find a good-sized RV encampment. It occupies both sides of the street. It gets even worse when I go to the street behind Google and in front of the famous Gold's Gym. The homeless have completely taken over the street, wandering in front of cars, blocking traffic, and so on. Gold's, which has only recently been able to reopen after long lockdowns, now faces the additional problem that the encampment discourages customers from coming into the area. This illustrates an irony. Years back, Venetians were upset about the tech companies, like Snapchat, Google, Facebook, all moving into the area. As their highly paid upper-level employees and executives moved into the area, housing costs and rents soared. This priced out many of the very people that had once made Venice a desirable community and a top tourist attraction. And now we see one of the very companies that drove up the rents, surrounded by the tents and the RVs of the homeless. The same situation occurred in Silicon Valley, with large homeless encampments springing up around the big tech campuses. This isn't as odd as it seems. Where the tech companies have moved, they've driven housing costs out the roof. For the elite upper-level programmers and executives that are highly paid, that's no problem. But as it was pointed out in an article about the encampments in Silicon Valley, the tech companies are notorious for converting jobs into gig work or contract work. This allows them to sidestep any of the laws relating to employment, benefits, or minimum pay. The average rent in Venice is over $3,400 a month. In Silicon Valley, it's worse. Many gig workers find they can't earn enough to cover the cost of living these days, nor can they find a better paying job due to the high number of jobs being converted to gig work. Just beyond the RV encampment at Google Venice is a fenced-in area with a guarded entrance that resembles a concentration camp. It's the Pacific Sunset Bridge housing project for the homeless. This is basically a large tent with 100 beds inside of it. It opened in February 2020 with an upfront development cost of $8.3 million. That works out to $56,000 per bed. That's $56,000 per bed in a tent. How do you make it cost that much? There are 10 of these bridge housing facilities in Venice. Yet Venice is still full of homeless people. The Pacific Sunset Housing Project doesn't seem to reduce the problem, but rather it seems to actually draw more homeless to the area. And residents complain that crime has soared since it opened and their quality of life has been destroyed. As I depart, you'll see more RVs lining the streets and more tents. Despite massive cleanup efforts and 10 bridge housing projects, there are still parts of Venice that working people and tourists can't enjoy due to the encampments. I don't see any one magic bullet to dealing with the homeless crisis. It's a symptom of the overall decay of our society on many fronts. The situation in Venice illustrates another interesting aspect of the problem. And that is how the richest corporations in the world seem to feel they can't afford to pay a very large percentage of their employees fairly. I'm not advocating new laws. I'm also not advocating for a socialist utopia where everybody is paid the same regardless of the value of their work. Socialism doesn't work, but neither does slavery. It's illegal to designate people who are actually employees as subcontractors. But for some reason, our elected officials and regulators seem to think that because it's done via an app, that they don't need to enforce the laws. I realize that there are so many other reasons. Drug addiction, mental illness, trauma are all big factors behind homelessness. I've talked about them too. But I'm going to close this with the question. If you were to enter one of those programs said to get the homeless off of the streets, how motivated would you be to clean yourself up and get new skills to land a gig job that won't earn you enough money to pay the rent? Think about that. No amount of expensive tents for the homeless will solve the problem until we address the factors that are creating the problem, and there are a lot of them. The time to start fixing them is now.